Mia Amo Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Professor Clive Landis, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the UWI Cavell Campus, Dr. Hyginus Jean Leon, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Professor Denzel Williams, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the UWI Five Island Campus, Chair of the UWI Press Board of Directors, and other members of the UWI Press Board of Directors, the family of Sir Alister McIntyre, his widow, Marjorie Lady McIntyre, his son, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, and his wife, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, is Deputy Division Chief, Western Hemisphere Department of the International Monetary Fund, his daughter and son-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Brian Clark, Dr. Shelton Nichols, a senior advisor to the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Professor Emeritus Andrew Downs, Professor Emeritus Compton Bourne, and Ms. Rosalie O'Malley. The three of them, along with Dr. McIntyre, served as editors of Caribbean Trade, Integration, and Development. Professor Winston Moore, Deputy Principal, the UWI Cavell Campus. Ms. Lisa Aline, Campus Bursar, the UWI Cavell Campus. Other executives, members of the senior management and staff of the University of the West Indies, members of the media, specially invited guests here at the UWI Cavell Campus, and those tuned in online via UE TV, Flow channels, 15 channels throughout the region. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. This evening, the UWI Press launches the 2-volume collection of the selected papers and speeches of Sir Alister McIntyre, edited by Andrew Downs, Compton Bourne, Arnold McIntyre, and Rosalie O'Malley. Tomorrow, Barbados honors the life and work of George Lamin, the preeminent philosopher of the 20th century Caribbean. An unwavering commitment to realizing the full potential of the peoples and institutions of the Caribbean links the lives of these two extraordinary, exceptional Caribbean men. If in his body of work, Professor George Lamin grounded the sovereignty of the Caribbean and the dignity of its laboring classes to be liberated from the grinding poverty and cultural alienation of still lingering colonial antecedents in over 50 years of incomparable regional and international public service, Sir Alister McIntyre delivered a unique blueprint for Caribbean development, firmly anchored in a philosophy of indigenous knowledge creation and buttressed by policies, programs, projects, and a visionary, fertile imagination, all intended to deliver the holy grail of Caribbean integration. From the time he was introduced to the economic thought of Sir Arthur Lewis as a brilliant and precocious teenager in Grenada, the country of his birth, at the home of the father of the West Indian Federation, T.A. Marichaud, Alister McIntyre determined that Caribbean regional integration and development economics would be his lifelong passion. The failure of the West Indian Federation only deepened his commitment to building resilient regional institutions, to expanding research on Caribbean economies and societies, to demonstrating internationally the quality and capacity of Caribbean intellectual expertise, and to have these policies and mechanisms, ideas and institutions serve the Caribbean and its peoples. His commitment was discernible in the multiple intersecting arenas of his academic, regional, and international public service. Whether in the burgeoning post-colonial Caribbean Academy, international Ivy League attachments, undertaking complex negotiations and capacity building in crafting the institutional architecture of regional and international development institutions, or building bridges of unity and proven shared expertise with African and Pacific countries, Alister McIntyre operationalized a faith in indigenous problem-solving of Caribbean challenges. He held firmly to the belief that Caribbean countries could chart their development path. This was influenced by what T.A. Marichaux termed in the early 20th century as, and I quote, the West Indies for West Indians. Sir Alister's entire professional life was dedicated to ensuring that relevant policies grounded in indigenously generated knowledge transformed economies, societies, lives. As a development economist, Sir Alister believed that the University of the West Indies was critical to the advancement of the economic integration process of Caribbean countries. As Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, he received the ready support from all CARICOM governments for enshrining the Granans Declaration of 1989. In that declaration, the standing of the UWI as a regional institution indefinitely, and we thank him. Throughout his life of exceptional public service, he remained unwavering about building the problem-solving capacity within the University of the West Indies. He fostered a culture of cutting-edge research and the application of that knowledge to enhancing the social and economic well-being of Caribbean countries and their citizens. Sir Alister was resolute about introducing students to the study of Caribbean economics. And as a then sole West Indian lecturer in the fledgling Department of Economics at the Mona campus in 1960, he worked hard to achieve this. He laid the foundation for the development of social sciences and management studies at the St. Augustine campus. And by the time he returned to the Mona campus in 1967, he had established a prototype program for what would evolve into the Arthur Lockjack School of Business. Working with Sir Sridath Ramphal and the Honorable P.J. Patterson, assisted by a seasoned cadre of Caribbean experts, as Secretary General of CARICOM, Sir Alister played a leading role in negotiating the first international trade and economic agreement that we know as the Lomé Convention, Lomé I, between the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries and the European Union. We are extremely fortunate. This 2-volume collection of papers will prove extremely valuable to current Caribbean politicians and political leaders, development technocrats, students, and women and men of the Caribbean, all seeking to make sense of the post-independent period in our societies during the second half of the 20th century. Sir Alister viewed public service as a moral obligation. He states, and I quote, "My stance has always been that coming from the UWI and later from the CARICOM Secretariat, I had a fundamental obligation to make myself available to all the countries of the region where I had the relevant skills and experiences to contribute to particular issues of problem solving." End of quote. This evening, with the launch of his edited papers and speeches, edited, as I mentioned already, by Professor Emeritus Andrew Downs, Professor Emeritus Compton Bourne, his son, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, and his executive assistant, Mrs. Rosalie O'Mealy, we are continuing Sir Alister's and the UWI's tradition of placing scholarship, policy, and ideas at the disposal of the region. The editors have made it possible for the region and the international community to have within these edited volumes the seminal thought, negotiating strategies, and policy prescriptions of one of the finest intellect from the 20th century Caribbean. The publication of these papers and speeches ensures that the intellectual work and worth of Sir Alister McIntyre are now embedded in the Caribbean intellectual tradition. We thank you. And now it is my pleasure to invite Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the UWI Cavell Campus, Professor Clive Landis, to bring a brief introduction as PVC and Principal. Professor Landis, I just want to give you a brief introduction so that you can stay there. Professor Landis is a professor of cardiovascular research who assumed the role of Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Cavell Campus on August 1st, 2021. He is an experienced researcher, having published over 150 scientific papers and conference presentations on the pathophysiology of inflammation during wound healing, vascular disease, and recovery post-surgery. On a regional level, he has served as chair of the UE Zika Task Force, the UE COVID-19 Task Force, while supporting laboratory capacity building as chair of the Caribbean Cytometry and Analytical Society. His most recent research has focused on policy response during a time of pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, the principal of the Cavell Campus, Professor Clive Landis.
Thank you very much, Professor Emerita, the Most Honourable Eugene Barrow, Chair of today's proceedings and former Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal, and might I add, mentor to me, of the University of the West Indies Cavell Campus. The Honourable Mir Amor Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor, the University of the West Indies, Dr. Hyginus Jean Leon, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Denzil Williams, Chair of the UE Press of Directors and other members of the UE Press Board of Directors, Marjorie Lady McIntyre, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, Deputy Division Chief, Western Hemisphere Department of the IMF, and the McIntyre family. Distinguished speakers and guests, a pleasant good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Cavell Campus, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the launch of this important collection of papers and speeches by Sir Alister McIntyre on Caribbean trade, integration and development, presented by the University of the West Indies Press. I especially welcome the McIntyre family, Lady McIntyre and Arnold McIntyre, to this evening's event. It is always a great honor and usually a learning opportunity to welcome our Prime Minister, Mir Amor Mottley, to the Cavell Campus. Welcome. I also look forward to hearing from one of our leading development thinkers, Dr. Jean Leon, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, whom I frequently quote. I am also very delighted to welcome Vice Chancellor of the UE, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, and two past and present campus principals, Principal Denzil Williams of the Five Islands Campus, and former principal of the Cavell Campus, Professor Emerita, the Most Honourable Eugene Barrow. Finally, I recognize and welcome other close colleagues of Sir Alister McIntyre involved in this evening's event, notably Professor Emeritus Compton Bourne, past principal of the St. Augustine Campus, and former Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Professor Emeritus Andrew Downes, and also Sir Alister's erstwhile executive assistant, Rosalie O'Mealy, who are co-editors of the book. There could scarcely be a more important topic at this critical conjuncture with the multiple external threats affecting our everyday life in the Caribbean than the topic of deepening regional integration and trade to preserve and propel Caribbean development. In his autobiography, The Caribbean and the Wider World, Alister McIntyre exhorts Caribbean leaders, the current Caribbean leaders, to harness the same sense of optimism and purpose, those are his words, that motivated his generation of public service leaders in the independence era. It is my belief that there is a resurgence of Caribbean regionalism happening just when the deepest possible crisis, the COVID pandemic, has struck our region, threatening our very lives and economic existence. In my world of public health, the esteem of the Caribbean region has undoubtedly risen as a result of the coherent and effective pandemic response that has succeeded in keeping death rates per capita in the Caribbean to almost 1/10 of that recorded by our American neighbors to the north and to the south. This is indeed a remarkable achievement that UWI has chronicled in the scientific literature that should not be taken for granted. Our regional, political, health, security, and disaster management systems have delivered when it mattered most. And the University of the West Indies played its role by contextualizing the vast and sometimes bewildering COVID-19 literature into a single source of scientific truth, thereby assisting Caribbean leaders in making critical evidence-based decisions. I believe that the Caribbean brand has been strengthened during the time of COVID, demonstrating to the world that we can manage a safe environment for tourists and citizens alike in the midst of a pandemic. There can be no doubt that even greater regional cooperation is now urgently required to help mitigate the grave new external threats that have exposed the Caribbean's vulnerability to our most basic needs of food and energy security. I am looking forward with keen anticipation to learning more about the visionary qualities of Sir Alister McIntyre from his collection of speeches and papers that, I have no doubt, would have foretold the vulnerabilities we are now experiencing in the Caribbean and the imperative for regional integration to address them. Let me once again reiterate how truly honored the CAFIL campus is to host the UWI Press, the McIntyre family, our Prime Minister, the editors, distinguished guests, and colleagues for the launch of these two books, Volumes 1 and 2, of Caribbean Trade, Integration, and Development. Please make sure to purchase your copies outside. Please note the plural, that is multiple copies of each volume, so that more people can benefit from the wisdom of one of the greatest minds in Caribbean development. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Landis. I would like to acknowledge the presence and apologize for my oversight of Mrs. Nadine Buckland, Acting General Manager of the UWI Press, and we couldn't have had this evening function without her. So just to state that, Mrs. Buckland, welcome to the CAFIL campus, and good to have you here. Now, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. I will provide a short introduction before you join us on stage. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles is Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West Indies and a distinguished academic, international thought leader, United Nations Committee official, and global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. Sir Hilary serves as a director of Sagicor Financial Corporation, PLC, the largest financial company in the Caribbean region. He's chairman of the Caribbean Examinations Council, the former chairman of the University of the West Indies Press, the current chairman of the Caribbean Community Commission on Reparation and Social Justice, president of Universities Caribbean, an editor of the UNESCO General History of Africa series, and a director of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center. He has also served as an advisor to the UN World Cultural Report, an advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations on Sustainable Development. Sir Hilary is a past vice president of the International Task Force for the UNESCO Slave Route Project and a past consultant for the UNESCO Cities for Peace Global Program. Sir Hilary has received numerous awards. I won't tell you all of them, including honorary doctors of letters from Brock University, the University of Glasgow, the University of Hull, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana, in recognition of his major contribution to academic research on transatlantic slavery, popular culture, and sport. And trust me when I tell you, I haven't mentioned all of them. Sir Hilary has lectured extensively in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and has published over 100 peer-reviewed essays in scholarly journals and more than 20 academic books. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice-Chancellor, to bring his greetings, Sir Hilary Beckles, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. Thank you.
Thank you, Udine. Thank you. Our Honorable Prime Minister, I'm so glad to see that you're not speaking tonight. Put up your feet and relax. Take some time off. It's good to see you, Prime Minister. Lady McIntyre, Lady Mac, and your very handsome son, Arnold, Mac, Madam Mac Jr. It's good to see all of you. It's good to see all of you here. Principal Landis, Principal Williams, Dr. Leon, CDB, pleasure indeed to have you. Our editors, Professor Bourne, Professor Downs, Dr. McIntyre and Ms. O'Mealy, and all of you distinguished ladies and gentlemen, very good evening, everyone. It is for me both an honor and a joy to bring greetings to each and every one of you on behalf of the university community. Alister was not only my Vice-Chancellor, he was my friend, my trusted friend, and my mentor. I will not forget the day when I was sitting in my office at Cave Hill, and the phone rang, and Alister said, "Okay, young Beckles, you had your fun. You've had your fun. Pack up your bags and come back to Jamaica." And that was that. Back to Jamaica to assist him in creating a first-class global quality assurance system for our academic product. And that was the beginning of my working relation with Sir Alister. Of course, by then I knew that he was, in many ways, the quintessential university man. As you know, our strategic plan, we call it the AAA strategic plan, built upon 3 pillars of access, alignment, and agility. But Alister also represented our AAA because he was first-class academic, brilliant administrator, and a great advocate for development discourse, all within one mind, one time, and one space. We know in many ways that he was one of the great architects of Caribbean development concepts, dedicated his entire life to pushing this Caribbean away from the colonial scaffold into sustainable development as a sovereign nation. If it is true that Sir Arthur Lewis was indeed the father of Caribbean development economics, and if it's also true that Willie Demas was the first son, well, undoubtedly, Alister McIntyre was the second son. And the three of them, they constituted a trilogy of economic thought and practice that is unprecedented in any other part of the world. I had the pleasure of sitting in the company of Willie Demas and Alister McIntyre, reflecting upon Arthur Lewis and understanding that depth of commitment, of consciousness to this project. These two collections represent, in my view, they represent the evidentiary basis of this truth. They constitute a lifetime of output in the printed word, in the spoken word, as a policy advocate, as a mobilizer of Caribbean consciousness around the imperative of development, and his academic publishing. I personally welcome these publications, personally, beyond the scope of my own engagement in Caribbean development. Because for many years, I have been of the view that there has been a crisis in respect of accessibility to the intellectual output of Sir Alister. I believe that his position and his status within Caribbean development discourse had been impeded by the fact that most of his work was not readily available to the people of the Caribbean, to our students especially. And that by breaking this bondage of accessibility, which is what our editors have done, I have no doubt that we are going to see in the months and the years ahead a resurgence around the usage of the work of Sir Alister, because precisely it is so perfectly relevant to today. I think we're going to see a McIntyre resurgence in terms of his contribution to development discourse, because the tradition has been to say that, Sir Arthur laid the foundation, the infrastructure, and then Willie Demas and Alister constitute the bridge over to the plantation economy economists, the post-New World economic group. But that was always a sudden conversation. It moved too quickly and too swiftly. Because yes, Alister McIntyre was a central force in that transition, but he remains relevant post-plantation economy to today, precisely because of the content and the ideological perspectives he offered, very relevant today, equally relevant today as they were 20, 30 years ago. These readings are for us in this contemporary to ingest and to digest and to reformulate and to see the clarity of Sir Alister. And this has always been one of his outstanding capacities. This clarity in articulating complex issues and bringing a kind of enlightenment to those who are listening to his presentations. He's a brilliant speaker, brilliant orator, and a magnificent presenter of complex issues. The University of the West Indies have always been very, very proud of Sir Alister as a scholar, Sir Alister as a strategist for higher education, and personally, you know, this argument he made over 30 years ago, that what is holding back Caribbean development is not a shortage of capital. It's a shortage of the critical skills necessary to build and transform new sectors, make old sectors more competitive, and the consciousness that is required among the citizenry in order to formulate that knowledge. On that basis, he became an outstanding Vice-Chancellor of this university because that was precisely what he sought to demonstrate and to illustrate. We celebrate him, we honor him, and tonight it's a pleasure with our editors to welcome back the intellectual work, the development consciousness of Sir Alister McIntyre. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Hilary. And now we will have remarks via video by Professor Denzil Williams, who is the Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the UWI Five Island campus. And in keeping with the format, I will introduce him briefly again before he delivers his remarks. As I've just said, Denzil Williams is a professor of international business, principal of the UWI Five Islands campus, and a Pro-Vice Chancellor of Industry, Academic Partnerships, and Planning for the UWI. He's the former Executive Director of the Mona School of Business and Management, and at the time, in fact, I think it is still the largest business school in the Caribbean. His first academic appointment was in 2006, and since then he has published over 60 refereed works on economic development, small firm strategy, and economic competitiveness in academic journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings. He's the author of 5 books, 2 of which won Outstanding Research Awards at the UWI. PVC Williams, Professor Williams, Principal Williams, serves on a number of boards as chairman, deputy chairman, and director of public and private sectors boards in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean region. It is my pleasure to invite Professor Williams in his capacity as chair of the board of directors of UWI Press to deliver his remarks.
This opportunity to recognize our chairperson, Professor Eugene Barrow, former principal of the Cayville campus, current principal, Professor Clive Landis, Dr. Jean Leon, president of the CBB, Dr. Shelton Nichols, senior advisor to the president, members of the McIntyre family, led by Lady McIntyre and Dr. Arnold McIntyre. Most importantly, let me recognize the most honorable Mayor Amor Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, who will be bringing reflections today. But with all that recognition, I think the greatest recognition ought to go to the editors who have pulled this volume together so that we can have an indelible mark in terms of Sir Alister McIntyre's work on the region. Let me congratulate our editors, Professor Emeritus Compton Bourne, Professor Andrew Downs, Dr. McIntyre, and Lady O'Mealy. Today, I join in the celebration of the work of one of the foremost intellectual giants of our beloved Caribbean, Sir Alister McIntyre. Sir Alister's work has a unique place in the discourse on Caribbean development, as it carves out a space for context-specific theorizing and empirical analyses based on one's circumstances, and not just a cut and paste, unbridled neoliberal approach to development. For indeed, McIntyre, having a nuanced understanding of the historical and social evolution of a post-colonial and post-slave society, recognized early in his career that the lived experience of the people must inform solutions to their developmental challenges. And so he went about carefully and painstakingly analyzing various aspects of their development and proffered solutions that are in keeping with their cultural and spiritual values in order to shape their life trajectory. So, within Caribbean Trade, Integration and Development, the editors of these volumes carefully and painstakingly selected works of Sir Alister to reflect his intellectual contribution to development discourse, looking at issues such as decolonization and trade policy in the West Indies, towards a new international economic order, small countries in the world economy, governance and decentralization in the context of a regional university, among many other insightful thoughts that Sir Alister McIntyre would have given. His speeches, academic papers, notes, all provide critical insights into the framing of a localized intellectual discourse on regional development, which can lay the foundation for the development and execution of homegrown policies and institutions to support our developmental efforts. I must also add that while Sir Alister took context-specific research into bearing on the discourse on local development, he was not insular in his intellectual thought, because he embraced the global village that the Caribbean context has to operate in. That, to me, is a remarkable stroke of intellectualism from Sir Alister McIntyre. These volumes should be required reading for all those who are interested in Caribbean development that is anchored on context specificity, intellectual rigor, and clarity of thought. Again, I want to thank the editors for these volumes. They are timely and relevant today for the generation of scholars, policymakers, and technocrats who are desirous of shaping a Caribbean nation that will participate in the new global economy powered by the fourth industrial revolution. We must participate in this new global economy on our feet and not on our knees. Sir Alister has given us enough thought for us to shape our future in that direction, so that we enter the global world on our feet and not on our knees. Congratulations again to the editors. Thank the McIntyre family for allowing us to actually have the intellectual input of a Caribbean scholar and a Caribbean giant to shape our intellectual discourse. I thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Denzil Williams, and I will introduce the President of the Caribbean Development Bank before inviting him to bring his greetings. Dr. Hyginus Jean Leon is the 6th President of the Caribbean Development Bank, the regional development finance institution, as we all know, based in Barbados. He was elected at a special meeting of the CDB Board of Governors in January last year for a 5-year term, and assumed the office on May 4th, 2021. Dr. Leon has over 30 years of experience in economic development and has directed macroeconomic and financial policy support to government authorities in Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Caribbean. He worked with the International Monetary Fund for more than 24 years, serving as Mission Chief of Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, the Bahamas, and the Gulf states of Oman, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as serving as the IMF's senior resident representative in Jamaica and Nigeria. Prior to his engagement with the IMF, Dr. Leon was an associate professor at State University of New York at Old Westbury in the United States. He has also served as Director of Research at the Central Bank of Barbados and Country Economist at the Caribbean Development Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Jean Leon.
Chair, Professor Emerita, the Most Honorable Eugene Barrow, protocols having been observed, permit me to acknowledge and recognize the Honorable Mayor Amma Mottley, Professor Hilary Beckles, Lady McIntyre, widow of Sir Alister McIntyre and family, also the editors, Professor Bourne, Professor Downs, Dr. McIntyre, and Ms. O'Meally. Distinguished speakers and guests, it is a distinct honor for me tonight, on behalf of the Caribbean Development Bank, to participate in the launch of the publication, Caribbean Trade, Integration and Development, the selected papers and speeches of Alister McIntyre. The collection itself indicates that Sir Alister's paper entitled Aspects of Development and Trade in the Commonwealth Caribbean, along with similarly themed writings which were presented at the Caribbean Heads of Government meeting in Barbados in 1967, led to the formation of the CDB in 1970. Therefore, it is no exaggeration to say that the bank can trace its antecedents to the writings of Sir Alister McIntyre. The close working relationship between Sir Alister and CDB should come as no surprise to anyone given his close personal and professional connection to Willie Dimas, one of the founding fathers of Caribbean integration, and from whom he took up the reins of Secretary General of CARICOM in 1974. This was just at the time that Willie Dimas was taking over from Sir Arthur Lewis as president of the CDB. At CDB, therefore, we had no hesitation in contributing to the launch of this significant collective work, which we hope will inspire a future generation of regional integrationists and development thinkers. Fittingly, the introduction to the publication provides the premise for my remarks on this momentous occasion. As it states, the papers illustrate the depth of his understanding of the economic and trading challenges facing the region since the 1960s, and a close reading will indicate that many of the issues identified by Sir Alister at that time are still realities today. As the entity charged with facilitating holistic, sustainable development across the Caribbean, the positions and prescriptions articulated by Sir Alister's writings provide ample guidance as we draw from that vast body of knowledge to fashion solutions for current and future challenges. On this occasion, permit me to place emphasis on key aspects of his philosophy that we continue to take forward and concerns we are working arduously to address, specifically regional economic integration, trends and challenges associated with the future of Caribbean development, and the centrality of knowledge. Heeding the instruction of a defining work on solutions for regional development, which had the benefit of Sir Alister's input, that is the Time for Action report, I will indicate the steps CDB is taking to build on his significant legacy. As the collection underscores, Sir Alister viewed economic integration as an essential element for propelling the growth and transformation of the region. As a creature of regional collaboration, CDB has embraced the concept of unlimited boundaries afforded by information technology to create a dynamic innovation ecosystem to foster integration into global value chains and accelerate the completion of the CSME agenda through the strengthening of trade facilitation and knowledge governance. In addition to logistical connectivity, we are seeking to deepen the region's cultural connectivity to create a growth mindset about the Caribbean's development ambitions and how we position ourselves on the global stage. To achieve this objective, we must harness technological infrastructure to create regional digital networks to facilitate enhanced services in trade, education, health, commerce, and government service delivery. Similarly, as his writings attest, Sir Alister saw investment in creating a knowledge-oriented workforce with an extensive skill base as critical for the region's future. CDB is actively seeking to elevate knowledge acquisition to promote a shift to evidence-based decision-making, a key driver for sustainable development. The bank is advocating for the amalgamation of digital, searchable, and interactive knowledge facilities to establish a common platform, potentially a network of networks, to accumulate, analyze, transform, and share knowledge in the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Improved access to refined data and enhanced analytics will facilitate the utilization of reliable, high-quality knowledge solutions to ensure the region's development efforts achieve intended outcomes. On the issue of development outcomes, Sir Alister himself noted and lamented the region's troubling track record with implementation, a deficit which policymakers, public administrators, donors, and other stakeholders in the region and international development community cite as deleterious to this day. As I have said on previous occasions, now is the time for definitive action to address impediments to implementation. Steps must be taken to reform legislative frameworks, to enable investment and innovation, improve procurement processes, to save time while maintaining compliance with best practices, and necessitate the cultural change that is needed to elevate a private sector enterprise mindset in public sector administration. The change of approach is no longer a matter for negotiation, as our region grapples with continuous exogenous shocks from factors such as geopolitical affairs and climate threats, while contending with multiple social and economic vulnerabilities. While the needs are vast, given the current pressures, CDB will prioritize food and nutrition security, energy security, water security, and shelter security, all of which can be integrated in a development space as key areas for the region to address in the near term to safeguard the long term. Notwithstanding, we cannot advance effectively without access to adequate and affordable finance. Further, it is imperative to foster a partnership with the private sector, one that is anchored on long-term national goals that provide little policy uncertainty, and one that is nurtured with engagement on projects from initiation to design to finance and to execution. While this is not necessarily the occasion for detailed elaborations, ultimately, the pursuit of regional sustainable development, which Sir Alister's writings emphasized over 6 decades, is about creating conditions which enable the people of the region to achieve their full potential through improved quality of life, increased opportunities for advancement, and functional social and economic systems that facilitate well-being and social cohesion. Achieving this will require an ecosystemic approach formulated to bolster social, institutional, productive, environmental, and financial resilience. We are driven by Sir Alister's extensive scholarship and guidance as we work towards these common objectives, and have no nobler goal than to base our entire forward trajectory on his wisdom shared for us through his writings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leon. Being a trailblazer for the Caribbean and Caribbean women's political leadership characterizes the national, regional, and international public service of the Honorable Mia Amor Mottley, the 8th Prime Minister of Barbados, and the first woman to be appointed to that high office. Prime Minister Mottley currently holds the portfolios of Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs, and Investment. The Prime Minister has led the Barbados Labour Party to 2 consecutive emphatic general elections victories in May 2018 and January 2022, winning on both occasions all 30 seats in the House of Assembly. She is the first woman in Barbados to serve as leader of the opposition, and in 1994 was the youngest person appointed a Minister of Government when she held the cabinet position of Minister of Education, Youth Affairs, and Culture at the age of 29. As the then Minister of Education, the Prime Minister would have worked very closely with Sir Alister McIntyre for 4 years because he served as the Vice Chancellor from 1988 to 1998, and she came in 1994 as Minister of Education. But I suspect that the relationship continued for very long after. Between 1994 and 2008, Ms. Mottley served in the cabinet of 3 successive administrations. After serving as the Minister of Education and Culture, Prime Minister Mottley served as Attorney General and Minister of Home Affairs, and then as Minister of Economic Affairs. In 2003, she was appointed Deputy Prime Minister. Her regional and international public service includes serving as the chair of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, between January 1st and June 30th, 2020. And she continues to hold for Barbados the lead head of government within CARICOM, bearing responsibility for the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, CSME. She serves as co-chair of the Americas Cruise Tourism Task Force for the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America markets, and served as co-chair of the Development Committee of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, a period November 2020 to October 2021. She is currently the co-chair of the World Health Organization Global Leaders Group on Antimicrobial Resistance. Under PM Mottley's presidency, which he assumed in October here in Barbados, Barbados successfully hosted UNCTAD's 15th session. UNCTAD, of course, is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and that 15th session was held in October 2021. It was the first meeting to be held in the Caribbean of this United Nations intergovernmental organization established in 1964 to promote the interests of developing countries in world trade. And I would like to add, it was the first UNCTAD to include a Gender and Development Forum in its 56-year history. Prime Minister Mottley's speeches at regional and United Nations conferences and her public lectures have generated much admiration and debate as a leading voice from the global south. And I frequently get messages from people from all over the world telling me how delighted they are with Prime Minister Mottley's speeches, and if I could let her know. In May 2022, Time magazine designated Prime Minister Mottley as one of 100 influential persons of 2022. The Prime Minister, let's not forget, is an attorney at law and also a Queen's Counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite the Prime Minister of Barbados to deliver her reflections on Sir Alister McIntyre.
Thank you very much, most honorable. And I say so conscious that you are most deserving of it. But when I agreed to give you, on behalf of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, my papers, I didn't know that it might elicit from you these lengthy introductions. And if I can now ask you and all other members of Cave Hill to simply introduce me as Mia hereinafter, then I can ensure that those papers are delivered forthwith. Distinguished guests all, but in particular members of the McIntyre family, Lady McIntyre, Arnold, Helga, Ramona, I am very happy to be here this evening, and I want to ask you for a minute to reflect on these words, because you will appreciate why, and why I also invited the guests that I invited today to accompany me very shortly. This meeting derives its principal significance from the unprecedented economic difficulties facing the region today. They can be starkly summarized as follows: annual rates of inflation running at 20% and above, escalating expenditure on imported food, worsening balance of payments positions as export receipts fail to match the growth in import expenditure, over 150,000 now looking for work, with the labor force growing at rates which might require in the future the creation of 500,000 jobs. Difficulties with financing the public sector because of rapid growth in recurrent expenditure arising largely from the inflationary situation. Startling increases in consumption expenditure on both private and public account at the expense of local savings and investment. I do not wish to over-dramatize the situation. At the present time, what is occurring in the Caribbean forms part of the larger global impact of the international economic crisis of the Third World. However, it is important that the governments and people of the region be thoroughly conversant with the hard facts of our economic situation, for it is from those facts and from the search for solutions to the problems which they pose that one begins to appreciate the need for urgent action to strengthen the regional movement. Those words were delivered on the 8th of December, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, 1975, by Sir Alister McIntyre. They could have as easily, with the exception of the 20% reference in inflation, be delivered in the year 2022 on the region of which we are members. I asked Simon Natrum, who is president of the Barbados Economic Society, to be my special guest this evening, not only because I felt that he would enjoy these proceedings, but because I wanted more than ever to drive home the point that we are in a relay race of development. And this relay race means that sometimes the circumstances which we confront may have similarities. I could as easily perhaps gone to the archives down the hill and chosen documents from 1920 that would have spoken about the completion of this country's efforts in fighting the Spanish flu and what it took for us as a nation to save lives, and then to ask the question whether we were as successful today, comparatively speaking, as we were 102 years ago. This relay race of development requires first and foremost that people understand who went before and the leg they ran and how they ran. And this work here provides that context. And context is all the more important, Professor Moore, because more and more as I read sometimes in newspapers, I wonder whether people have lost perspective and lost context. For to hear that $900 million from an IMF program is something that will cripple a country when that constitutes a mere 6.4% of its debt, and at no stage will garnish more than 4% of the revenues in servicing the debt, tells me that that figure has been used to excite persons without context. Because if context was placed, then you would realize that that amount is not only one of the smallest amounts, but that the capacity to service the debt is more than manageable. And that thirdly, if you look at it from the perspective that the debt was used to be able to secure from buses to transport people home near and far, to garbage trucks, to equipment to deal with roads, to a whole range of things, then you have context and perspective. I say these things because the second reason that I am inviting Mr. Natrum here is that I believe that I have benefited, and others like myself have benefited, from being part and parcel of the early witnesses to Caribbean development, in the audience, from the audience, at the table, and learning long before given the opportunity. Professor Barrow would have reflected on the fact that my first public position was Minister of Education. And indeed, my first Vice-Chancellor as a member of Council, University of the West Indies Council, Cave Hill Campus Council, University Grants Committee, and ultimately the Strategy Committee that was established by the leadership and vision of Sir Alister, was Sir Alister McIntyre. I consider myself lucky because that came on the heels of my very first public involvement. My very first attendance at a public function was at the tender age of 15 years old as a student at Queen's College, having been invited jointly by both Willie DeMass and the then Ambassador for the United States, Sally Shelton, to participate in a public policy encounter with the Caribbean Association of Industry and Commerce and Mr. Pat Thompson, who was then its leader. I don't forget that moment because at that point in time I understood the passion and the commitment of those around that table at Sam Lord's Castle as where the meeting took place. And it put in me a fire in my belly, for want of a better expression. that this experiment called regional integration could not be allowed to falter simply because our generation was not up to the task. It was ironic that my first regional encounter as a young member of the Barbados Labour Party, with regional, I'm about to say polycrats instead of technocrats, and for those who have read the book, they would appreciate what I mean, was actually with the West Indian Commission, a time for action. And I will never forget the meeting that we held under the leadership then of Sir Henry Ford, with Sir Sridath Ramphal and Sir Alister McIntyre and other members of that commission. I point out these references because it is important more than ever. And I regret that whether it is COVID or otherwise, that we are not speaking to young students here, because it is important more than ever for the people of this region and of this university to understand that they do not come to this moment in time without a legacy. They come here with a strong legacy. And so, Hilary, I will not be telling tales out of school when I reflect on that first interview you had for the position of Vice Chancellor, when we spoke then extensively about the strong legacy of development economists that this region has given the world. Not the region, the world. And I say to Simon now that I've asked you here today and to speak through you, such that in 30 or 40 years from now you may well be on this platform, and that when you speak from this platform, that you speak of the relay of Caribbean development, and that you perhaps, unlike Sir Alister, and unlike those who went before me, and perhaps even me, will not have to speak about the patient growth of regional integration. So Alister explains it well by reflecting on the fact that it cannot be reversed. 3 centuries of colonial domination economically cannot be reversed. He said in 7 years, I say in 50 years. But the reality is that that must never be an excuse for complacency. And I fear that as we come around this circle the third time, and you may ask why I say the third time, because I start with Jamaica in 1946, it was, Sir Hilary, or 48? 48? Montego Bay Conference. That this is our third chance. And the first chance coincided in a post-war environment when the Bretton Woods institutions were now being settled upon. And little did he know, or we know, that Sir Alister would have a son who would end up being a divisional director, deputy divisional director of the Western Hemisphere, and others who will soon be there, carrying on that mantle. The second time round was coming out of the burgeoning independence movement into the new international economic order and all of the great problems of the early 70s with the abandonment of the gold standard and the oil crisis and the burgeoning debt that would follow. And now us. We must not leave this moment as we found it. And it is for that reason that my government continues to work aggressively to change the architecture which governs how the world deals with finance and development. We are seeing some green shoots with respect to the recognition that people are prepared to accept that GDP per capita cannot be the only basis upon which access to concessional development funds can happen. The pace perhaps is not as fast as some would like, but the context is 30 years of battle, 32 years of battle to be precise, so that you begin to accept that what we have seen happen in the last 2 years has been nothing short of miraculous, but it has been aided by the historical context once again of COVID and the climate crisis coming together at the same exact moment, to be only now further propelled by the geopolitical battles that the president of the CDB referred to in his speech just now. My friends, we have a duty to carry the battle at this moment in time. And we are working with all interested parties in the United Nations and all interested non-governmental organizations, because we believe, like Sir Alister, that the regional integration movement must propel us, but we accept that the context within which it can propel us must also be understood. And that is a repurposing of our international financial institutions that simply do not see us sufficiently and have never been structured to be able to deal with us in the ways in which we need it, particularly in facing the triple crisis that we face now between the climate crisis, the COVID pandemic, and other pandemics, I must add, that will soon follow, and, of course, the geopolitical consequences on inflation as a result of the war in Ukraine and the impact on fuel and food, which is very, very real. In Guyana last month, May, today's the 30th of June, yes, we met, and we believe for the first time there is a serious energy in the propulsion that is necessary for us to attain food security in this region, concomitant with the reality that food security will only be anchored by transport issues being resolved. To that extent, therefore, I go to the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting next week, confident that for us the moment has arrived and hopefully the will is there to match it. But the context that we go with is that of the work of those who went before Sir Arthur Lewis, Sir William Dimas, Sir Alister McIntyre, recognizing that their work built a foundation upon which now we must further build, while at the same time bringing along our populations, because we have knowledge that they didn't have when they fought these battles, and we have a population that is far better educated today than what they would have left and found, and left, I should say, at the time. I trust and pray that this work, this great work, 2 volumes of almost 600 pages of rich Caribbean thought and writing, will help us in this effort not to shy away from our role in the shaping of global financial institutions or in regional development thought, but to propel us at a pace that will allow us to see greater progress than they would have seen without the benefit of this work. Simon, I say to you that, and I'm conscious that others like Carrie Levitt have written, that this university of which you have been a proud member has raised you up now, along with others like you, to take the battle to the world and to recognize that we have trained you to be as good or better than, because you do so with context and experience and perspective. And we are facing a world now that is sorely lacking in global moral strategic leadership. Let that leadership come from us at all levels and in all spheres. And let us build on the excellent work that is so immortalized today in these 2 volumes of gentlemen like Sir Alister McIntyre and many others who, by their sweat of their brow, have literally laid the way for the rest of us now to engage and to take that baton for this leg of the relay. I want to salute Arnold, yourself, Professor Compton Bourne, who was a critical part of that leadership when I went into the University of the West Indies, as he then was, as principal of St. Augustine campus. Andrew, you at head of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute here. And it is ironic that I speak this evening as president of UNCTAD, given Sir Alister's role as Deputy Secretary General of that United Nations institution at an early stage of his career, carrying the flag for the Caribbean in a most distinguished manner as he did. My last conversation with Sir Alister, Sir Hilary, was on cricket. And I think I called you the weekend after of that conversation. I referred to it only to simply say to all others that those who believe that this walk of this life is to be unidimensional have not yet understood the joy of being a Caribbean person. That we can walk and chew, and run even and chew, is something that is unique to us in many respects, because as you go overseas, you realize that many people can't do what we can do. But because we have been trained to be resilient, we can do these things well. So Alister's passion on cricket that weekend and the future of West Indies cricket will forever stay in my mind, and recognize that we as Caribbean citizens come to this moment in time not just to build an economy, but as we say in Barbados, to build societies. It is against that backdrop, therefore, that I end with the words of Lloyd Best once again, that we pay tribute today to a polycrat and a nation builder. So Alister, we salute you. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Mottley. We will have a review. We have heard so much of the work, and we need to have a more detailed sense of what the 2 volumes contain. And to do that, Dr. Shelton Nichols, who is a senior advisor to the president of the Caribbean Development Bank, will provide us with that review. Prior to this role, he was senior financial sector expert in the Money and Capital Markets Department of the International Monetary Fund, where he led the development of the Financial Sector Stability Review, also FSSR, and managed technical assistance for countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He also served as resident advisor on financial stability at the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, CARTAC, where he pioneered the establishment of the Financial Stability Work Stream, a first among the IMF's Regional Technical Assistance Centers, RTACs. In addition, he served as Deputy Governor, Research and Policy at the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for 10 years, as Executive Director of the Caribbean Center for Monetary Studies, and as the first chairman of the Caribbean Development Fund, and also as a tenured lecturer in monetary, financial, and quantitative methods at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. And of course, he has published widely in regional as well as international academic and policy journals on trade, economic integration, econometric modeling, and financial services. It is my pleasure to now invite Dr. Shelton Nichols to provide us with a review of the publications. Dr. Shelton Nichols.
The Honorable Mayor Emma Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Professor Emerita, the most Honorable Eugene Barrow, former Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal, the UWI Cayfield Campus, Dr. Hygienius Leon, my boss, Caribbean Development Bank, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor, the University of the West Indies, Professor Clive Landis, Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal, the UWI Cayfield Campus, Pro Vice Chancellor Professor Denzel Williams, Professor Emeritus Compton Bourne, Professor Emeritus Andrew Downs, Marjorie Lady McIntyre, widow of Sir Alister McIntyre, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, one of my good friends, Miss Rosemary O'Malley, distinguished speakers and guests. It is an honor and privilege to undertake a review of this 2-volume collection of speeches and papers of Sir Alister McIntyre, who played such a pivotal role in laying the foundations of regional integration in the Caribbean, as well as in expanding the region's human capital base. Before I plunge into a discussion of the 2 volumes, I would like to indicate that collective works of this nature that chart the professional development, management journey, and contribution of great intellectuals and administrators in our region ought to be more commonplace in our Caribbean space, since they not only offer a perspective on how our societies have evolved, but more importantly, provide lessons for the future growth and development of the region. Indeed, retrospection and prospection constitute integral aspects of the process of sustainable development. It is in this context that I wish to add my congratulations to the Herculean efforts of this team of editors, comprising Professors Emeriti Andrew Downs and Compton Bourne, Sir Alister's son, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, and Rosalie O'Malley, former director in the Office of the Vice Chancellor, for curating this collection of speeches and papers not only for posterity, but more importantly, to provide important insights on how we should be tackling contemporary social and economic challenges. Their personal and intimate intellectual relationship with Sir Alister is what gives this collection its distinctive focus. This 2-volume collection of speeches and papers, while an important opus on its own, can only be fully appreciated when it is read in conjunction with Sir Alister's autobiography on the Caribbean and the wider world, Commentaries on My Life and Career, as well as Sir Sridhar Ramphal's autobiography on Glimpses of a Global Life. Together, these autobiographies provide important historical, personal, and professional context for several of the papers contained in this collection. Alas, the icing on the cake would have been William Damas's own autobiography, which would have provided a fulsome context of Sir Alister's significant contribution on the global and regional stage. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. So what should we expect to find in this duology or 2-part volume? Let me begin with the first volume, which focuses on Sir Alister's enduring contribution to international trade and economic integration, which he saw as the indispensable vehicle for the transformation and sustainable development of the Caribbean region. This volume is divided into 3 sections and contains a total of 27 papers, 377 pages, that cover the economic integration experience of the region in Section 1, the related issue of the international trading relations in a dynamic and competitive global economy in Section 2, and the future of Caribbean trade and development in Section 3. I wish to beg your indulgence for a short while to put the various papers of these sections in their full socio-political context. On the economic integration front, Section 1 contains all the key pieces that elucidate Sir Alister's thinking on the importance of economic integration for the region. The key papers that stand out in my view are the ones on aspects of development and trade in the Commonwealth Caribbean, decolonization and trade policy in the West Indies, the role of the economic integration process in regional development, the Caribbean experience, and Caribbean integration and development, some further steps for reconceptualizing integration for development. Among these, the seminal piece is the paper on aspects of development and trade in the Commonwealth Caribbean, which brought to the fore and made the significant case for integration in the Caribbean. In his autobiography, Sir Alister noted that William Damas had shown this paper to the then Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Williams, who liked it so much that he suggested that it be distributed throughout the region and that an expert group be convened to discuss it. When you get that kind of praise from Dr. Williams, it's really substantial. This paper, along with the report of the UE-MONA meeting of experts and the Dickinson Bay Agreement drafted by Sir Sridhar Ramphal, was presented to a Caribbean Heads of Government meeting in Barbados in 1967. It is at that meeting that heads of government agreed to establish CARIFTA with its secretariat based in Guyana and, of course, the Caribbean Development Bank in Barbados. In many regards, we can consider this paper as the birth paper. I would like to call it the birth certificate for the Caribbean integration movement, and indeed for the Caribbean Development Bank, whose charter entered into force on January the 26th, 1970. The decadal period from 1965 to 1975 was one of extraordinary vision for the integration movement under the leadership of William Damas, who oversaw the transition from CARIFTA to CARICOM between 1970 to 1974, before passing the reins of the stewardship of CARICOM during 1974 to 1977 to Sir Alister. By the decade of the 1980s, Sir Alister was quite concerned about the stalled integration momentum in the region and collaborated with Sir Ramphal, ably supported by William Damas, under the auspices of the West Indian Commission, to produce the Time for Action report, which contained several germane recommendations to prepare the West Indian society for the challenges of the 21st century. Among the key ones were the deepening of the process of regional integration through the creation of the CARICOM single market and economy, the widening of the process of integration, and relatedly, the establishment of the Caribbean regional negotiating machinery to formulate and implement coherent negotiating positions for plurilateral, that's post-Lomé, multilateral, and bilateral negotiations. This triumvirate of regional integration and development leadership had begun a radical overhaul of regional integration governance, policy, and financing. The second section in the first volume highlights his key contributions to international trading relations and the positioning of the Caribbean region on the global trading stage. Another of Sir Alister's significant contributions was his careful and painstaking efforts to ensure that the Caribbean had a seat at the table in all international negotiations that had a direct bearing on the sustainable development prospects of the region. William Damas pointed out in an article in our leading regional journal, Social and Economic Studies, some years ago, that Sir Alister was severely critical of the existing West Indian trading policy, which had a heavy reliance on a high-cost agricultural sector that depended on preferential markets abroad. He urged for innovative thinking and the urgent reorganization of trade policy. Indeed, McIntyre recognized quite early on that the Caribbean needed to reposition itself to achieve great international competitiveness against the backdrop of an accelerating process of global trade and financial liberalization, and advocated strongly for active participation of the region in several negotiating arenas, including the Lomé and post-Lomé arrangements, the CBI, the Caribbean-Canada Agreement, the Association of Caribbean States, and of course the World Trade Organization. He played a pivotal role in the Caribbean's substantial influence, as was mentioned earlier by I think Prime Minister Mottley, in the first ACP negotiations. He was also instrumental in the preparation of the negotiating mandate for the post-Lomé arrangements, which emphasized development and trade cooperation, development of a services regime, especially given the region's competitive capability in some core services, tourism, music, and of course the significant streamlining of the panoply of financing arrangements to enable greater access for developing countries. This point has been actually raised by Prime Minister Mottley. He held numerous consultations, commissioned a number of technical studies from university scholars, the private sector, and governmental institutions, and developed structured negotiating positions through his blue and red negotiating books. We all remember those very fondly, to enable the region to speak with one voice and hold a common position in the international community. In a conversation with him before his passing, he was quite saddened by the fact that the Time for Action report which contained many poignant recommendations of relevance to the current global challenges that we face, was not endorsed for full implementation on the regional scale. At the core of the third section in the first volume are McIntyre's thoughts on what is needed to propel sustainable development in the Caribbean region. He had been adamant that the Caribbean needed to seize opportunities for trade in goods and services offered under various arrangements, including the European single market. His key recommendations included making competitiveness a watchword for all sectors, targeting services for export development, and strengthening our knowledge base by deepening education, training, and research. This last recommendation provides the important segue into the second volume entitled Aspects of Human Resource Development and Higher Education, which was an equally important preoccupation of his long and successful career. This volume contains two sections that address the importance of human resources, development for long-term growth and development of small economies, and the role of the university in this development process. Human resources development has been the central theme in Sir Alister's work, which he viewed as a critical input for not only advancing the regional integration movement, but ultimately for building sustainable livelihoods in the region. For him, human resources development was important for building a knowledge economy, instrumental for enhancing productivity growth, and vital for building a competitive export base. In the paper on human resources development, which is the key article in the first section of Volume 2, he stressed the importance of viewing human development as the purpose of economic development. Human resource development, in his view, was all about developing the capability of people to lead fulfilling lives and giving expression to the idea that economic development does not only involve increasing the production of goods and services, but is ultimately concerned with improving the human condition. It's a very important quote in his work. Among his common pet peeves was the low level of attainment at the primary and secondary school levels, the limited access to tertiary level education, the inadequate investment in research and development, which had the potential for active commercialization, and the general low level of enrollment in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. On the education front, he was quite insistent about youth participation and either devised or supported various initiatives to encourage a younger generation of scholars to participate directly in the regional integration project. These initiatives included nominating several staff members of UWI during his tenure as Vice-Chancellor to directly participate in various meetings and debates at the CARICOM Ministerial Councils, especially those on trade and development and finance and planning. I was dropped into this as a youngster in my 20s. Secondly, commissioning technical and policy papers on various aspects of Caribbean integration. Thirdly, ensuring that regional integration was a key element of the undergraduate and graduate curricula at the UWI. And of course, fostering cross-disciplinary work between scholars and policymakers in the region and their counterparts in international, academic, and multilateral institutions. As a direct beneficiary, I was strongly encouraged and eventually sent to pursue doctoral studies on Caribbean economic integration at the University of London in the early 1990s to support the work of the West Indian Commission. And also in the 2000 period, they pushed me out to collaborate with an international team of researchers at the University of Nottingham to prepare empirical studies that assessed the progress of Caribbean integration. The second section of Volume 2 offers several key insights and recommendations for strengthening education and training, including through online delivery of educational programs, active promotion of apprenticeship schemes, developing information systems to track developments in the labor market, importantly, measuring and monitoring productivity changes, and of course, increasing public-private sector partnerships on innovation and entrepreneurship. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this collected volume is a must-read for economists, policymakers, politicians, students, and civil society who are trying to formulate agile responses to our ever-changing socio-economic landscape. I will hasten to add that while the Caribbean Development Project is still a work in progress, Sir Alister has left us a proud and enduring legacy through his professional efforts and advocacy for regional integration, and his untiring work on the academic and policy front to build international networks and support for small states in charting their development path in a fast-paced and evolving global environment. Current challenges in the region and the global environment, including the looming food crisis and climate change, require that we proceed with even more haste in bringing his dream of a more integrated and connected Caribbean region to fruition. I beg to close this review with my favorite quote from Sir Alister. I remain an unapologetic regionalist with an underlying confidence in the capacity of the peoples of this region. I thank you for the courtesy of your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nichols. And now we would like to have a presentation of the 2 volumes. I would like to invite Mrs. Nadine Buckland and Marjorie Lady McIntyre to make these presentations. And I will call the names of the persons who are going to receive the volumes, and I'd like to start with the Honorable Prime Minister, Mia Amor Mottley, who will receive the first gift of the books from the works of Professor Sir Alister McIntyre. Next will be the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Hyginus Leon. Dr. Shelton Nichols, that will stand in review too. Mrs. Jennifer Yard, Director, the Barbados National, Director Acting the Barbados National Library Service. Mrs. Judith Toppin, Officer in Charge, the Sidney Martin Library, the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. And receiving on behalf of Salises, I've asked Professor Winston Moore to receive the copies on behalf of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies. Professor Winston Moore. Thank you very much, Marjorie Lady McIntyre. Thank you very much, Mrs. Nadine Buckland. Now I would like to invite to deliver the vote of thanks Dr. Arnold McIntyre, an economist, Deputy Division Chief of the Western Hemisphere Department of the International Monetary Fund, and editor of this collection, and the son of Sir Alister McIntyre, Dr. Arnold McIntyre.
Chairperson, Professor Emeriti, the Most Honorable Eugene Barrow, former Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal, UWI Cave Hill. Protocols already being observed allow me to recognize the following: the Honorable Prime Minister Mia Mottley, Professor Shirley Beckles, Professor Clive Landis, the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Pro-Vice Chancellor Professor Denzel A. Williams, the McIntyre family, Lady Marjorie McIntyre, Mrs. Helga Clark, and Ramona McIntyre. My colleague editors, distinguished guests and speakers, I prefer to say friends. This project was some time in the making. On behalf of the editors, I would like to thank Sir Alister and for my family for agreeing to undertake this project. When we approached Sir Alister in December 2016 to compile and publish his papers, he expressed full support and deep appreciation for the initiative. The editors started to work on the project in early 2017, with Sir Alister's full involvement with regards to the selection of papers and speeches. The editors would like to thank him, obviously, for his outstanding work for the region, as reflected in this 2-volume publication of his papers and speeches. And the family would also like to thank the editors for their diligent efforts. Very special thanks must be given to 3 institutions which contributed generously to the financing of the project: the International Development Research Center in Canada, the Caribbean Development Bank, not only for its financing, but for the participation of the President, my friend and colleague, Dr. Jean de Leon, and the Axel McCall Foundation in Trinidad and Tobago. The UWI Press was instrumental in getting the publication to a stage where it can be launched today. We would like to thank all of those staff members who were involved in the production and marketing of the publication, led by the former General Manager of the Press, the late Dr. Joseph Powell, and the current Acting General Manager, Mrs. Nadine Buckland. The chairpersons of the Board of the Directors of the Press, Dr. Luz Longsforth and Professor Denzel Williams, must be specially thanked for advancing the project at critical stages. We offer sincere thanks to Dr. Angela Ramsey and Mohammed Rafi for offering very valuable assistance with editing, proofreading, and related activities, thus enhancing the quality of the final product. We must pay thanks to Vice Chancellor Professor Shirley Beckles. Must be specially thanked for offering his full support for the project and are also assisting with the resolution of some challenges encountered along the way. To provide a certain light closure to proceedings today, I would like to give a few anecdotes, one of which of my father's interactions. The first starts with Hillary. I recall being in Jamaica at the home, and my father had a small study where I said he used to conduct Congress. He would sit there and speak to a wide variety of people across the region, not as somebody that was retired, but as somebody who was fully active. And I recall one day there was an animated conversation going on, but there was also cricket in the living room. And my father only left when he thought the West Indies were losing and it was a damn waste of time. Those in the family know how he reacts to cricket matches. So I said, "What were you doing in there, man? We were doing well here." He said, "That was a conversation with Hillary. These things are never short." So Vice Chancellor Shirley Beckles, thank you for your full support of the project and also assisting with the resolution of some challenges we encountered along the way. The editors would like to thank Sir Sridhar Ramphal for preparing a tribute for the publication, the Most Honorable Professor Kenneth Hall for writing the foreword, and Dr. Selton Nichols for his endorsement and review of the publication. Several institutions provided assistance with the publication with regards to the relief of copyright for articles and monographs, and also the provision of copies of the articles reproduced in the 2 volumes. These institutions are duly recognized in the publication. In his dedication for the publication, Sir Alister makes reference, and I quote, "to past and current generations of Caribbean economists who have devoted their attention to the intellectual foundations of Caribbean integration and development. Their ideas and activities have provided the groundwork for the development of institutions or policies upon which future generations of economists can build." The editors would like to thank all of those who will purchase the publication, use or advance the ideas of Sir Alister. We would like to extend special thanks to Prime Minister Mottley for making time in her always very hectic schedule to participate in today's launch, and that will allow me my second anecdote. I recall when the Barbados election was held in 2018. We spoke on the phone maybe about a week after the election. So he asked me, what do you think is the lay of the land in Barbados? But I knew he was keen to tell me something rather than to hear from me. So I said, why don't you go first? He spoke for about 30 to 35 minutes and laid out all that he felt Mia had to deal with. So at the end, I said, Chief, this is a very formidable agenda. How do you think she's going to be able, it's a managerial task in itself to get all of these institutions and cabinet and stakeholders to pull in the same direction. He said, I think your sympathy is misplaced. If you know Mia's work ethic, I feel sorry for the people that have to work for her rather than the people that work for Mia. And that has stuck with me since then. And you can see the extensive resume that Eugene so kindly laid out pays testimony to Mia's work ethic. Another anecdote I will share is that we in the CRNM, Prime Minister Owen Arthur and ourselves were involved in some very difficult negotiations on the CSME, whereby we were trying to advance the agenda on the free movement of labor that will allow us then to go into the WTO and accept international obligations in this area. Very difficult. Whole day, late into the evening. So we were in the St. Lucia, La Toc, I think it was the name of the hotel. And I was sitting there around 11 o'clock in the night, feeling very dejected by the whole turn of events. And Owen came up to me and said, young McIntyre, what do you think we are going to achieve today? I said, not very much. And as we were exchanging on the day's developments or lack of developments, so Alister came up and he said, why are you fellas looking so dejected? As an unrepentant regionalist, when you work in the Caribbean, you have to understand frustration is part of the baseline, but there are extenuating circumstances. In these moments, you need to think of the Caribbean beaches. You need to think of Trinidad Carnival. You need to think of cricket. You need to think of ackee and saltfish, of oil dung, and the rich diversity of the Caribbean. And then you will be fully reminded these are frustrations worth dealing with. And those words always stuck with me. I would like to extend the heartfelt thanks of my family to colleague editors, Professor Compton Bourne, Professor Andrew Dong, and Ms. Rosalie Amelie. Rosalie's diligence in putting together the collection of speeches and papers were valuable inputs in the editorial and publication process. Finally, on behalf of my colleague editors, Compton and Rosalie, I would like to extend specific thanks and special thanks to Professor Andrew Downs. Professor Downs' outstanding contribution to this project, his diligence, his perseverance, his leadership is what made this project come to fruition. Andrew has not only been a friend and a colleague, but it was really good to see the influence my father had on him. Thanks all for attending today.
Thank you, Arnold, and thank you to everyone who participated in this event and who attended in person here and online by watching on UE TV and its 15 floor channels throughout the region. Honorable Prime Minister, Vice Chancellor, Principal of the Cable Campus, all distinguished guests and colleagues of UWI, this evening function is a fitting tribute to the life and legacy of Sir Alister McIntyre. We are delighted that you chose to join us. We know these publications will expand your knowledge on the Caribbean, but more importantly, provide fresh guard in our perennial search for solutions to Caribbean challenges. Good evening, and thank you for coming, and I will join you outside at the table where you will be purchasing the books for those of you who are in the audience. Thank you very much and good evening.